Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cities Digital Consulting webinar. This month it's extra read all the barcodes. And this edition is going to be a build along, and we'll be walking through an entire configuration process. So today's content will be helpful to anyone who's looking to review the basics of setting up a quick field session, as well as someone who's really just looking to use quick fields to process barcodes. It might be a new area or something you're looking to add to your quick fields tool set. This content does assume that you have some familiarity with the quick fields interface. So if you're looking for basic quick fields training, we have additional resources, or setting up a training session with one of our trainers might be a good step for that, and then come back to this content. As usual, this webinar will be recorded, so it will be available for viewing later and sharing with your friends. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica Welsh. I am the Consulting Director here at CDI. So I work with all of the consultants who help our clients to build out these quick fields type barcode sessions. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to see today. Today is a build along session, and what we're going to do is have both video or visual and audio guided building of a complete quick field session from start to end. So we're going to show you how to get ready to build a quick field session, to actually build the quick field session together, and then test it at the end. So you'll be able to, hopefully by the end of going through this process, have something that is ready to deploy. If you have questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A section of your GoToWebinar interface. And we'll be going through the questions so that hopefully everybody can get their questions answered, so you'll know how to build this on your system as well. As we go through, any time we're trying to portray information to a wide audience, I like to provide a few tips for success. So one is, we're going through a predefined process that we're building out. So if you're building along, you may want to just notate any advanced customizations that you want to do that would fit more into your environment, or additional things that you might want to build in, so that you can come back to them afterward, as opposed to getting stuck on that while you're trying to keep up. Another one is, try to ask questions right away so that you can keep up with the webinar and keep moving through the steps if you're building along. And then the last one is, at the end of this webinar, of course, we'll have a survey that will pop up. And if you could just take a moment to fill that out and give us any feedback on either the process or the topics that you like to see, or some of the things that you would have liked to see in a webinar like this, that's really helpful to us, and we will review those and incorporate those into future webinars. And then lastly, if you do get completely lost as you're following along, don't worry, the webinar is recorded, so you'll be able to come back to it. And then if you still need additional guidance or would like additional help, you can always set up a time with one of our consultants or one of our trainers to finish up your session, or to just get an overview of the product itself. So today we're going to take a look at a check run capture session. So many of our clients have an accounting software that will produce a barcoded cover sheet when they issue payments. And they might use that to scan in the cover sheet, the checks, and the paid invoices. And so this is something that's used by a lot of our clients, and we've set it up a lot of times, so it's a generally applicable session. But barcodes can also apply to things like cover sheets. So if you're doing a massive backscan project and you have a large amount of files that you're looking to standardize how you collect and index those, your large back file of, maybe it's accounting files, maybe it's address files, maybe it's client files, you can create barcoded cover sheets in order to be able to ingest those files really quickly. The reason we use barcodes instead of just text sometimes is barcodes are the most reliable source of image capture information. So they're going to be more reliable even than Zone OCR. And so if you can choose barcoded cover sheets, that's a great way to get documents in and have that really high accuracy. Barcoded quick field sessions could also be used for incoming statements. A lot of the statements that are issued either by vendors or by reporting agencies will now include a cover sheet or a barcode on the first page or sometimes all pages. So these are things that can be processed by quick fields as well. Same with bills. A lot of the vendors are now including barcodes on their bills that might include some information about the payment. If you can capture the information from that barcode, you might be able to parse out that data and have all of your indexing done automatically by quick fields. And then we've also seen barcodes used by court files. And this will help with if you need to apply, say, the case number to every single document coming in. You can apply that using a barcoded cover sheet or a barcoded either cover sheet or a sticker. We've seen some people do. Then you could just put it on each page. That way when it's scanned in, there's no manual indexing by, let's say, a centralized scanner. So lots of different ways you can use barcodes in your agency. So let's take a look at what we're going to walk through today. So from the end user's perspective, the process that we're designing today will look like this. So a user will scan documents into an inbox in Laserfiche. And so this will be like a batch file. So all of your barcode cover sheets with their associated content would just be scanned into a big batch, and the images would be quality controlled, and then they'd be waiting in a folder in Laserfiche to be picked up by quick fields. Then we'll open the quick fields session. Then we'll run the quick fields process and check the results. And so this is that process of quick fields going through, recognizing the barcodes and applying the appropriate metadata. And then we'll store the completed files into the folder structure that we want them to go into in the Laserfiche client, right? So today what we're seeing is a process where you would scan documents first and then process them with quick fields second. But you could certainly scan right into a quick field session as well. So for this build along, we're going to use 3 different pieces of Laserfiche software. We're going to use the Laserfiche client, the administration console, and quick fields. And for today's session, the version is compatible all the way back to version 8, but I will be demonstrating on a version 10 system. For the build along today, we're going to first create folders in Laserfiche. And the folders we're going to have are our inbox, where quick fields is going to pick up documents. And then I will also create the folder for the delivery of the quick fields documents. We're going to create a template that we're going to use for our quick fields session. So we'll be able to see the template in all of the fields that we're going to use to index and send that information from the barcodes into the template. Then we'll walk through the creation of the actual quick field session. So we're going to go through the full wizard so you can see every step along the way of the quick field session. And then we're going to test and demonstrate how it works. All right, so I'm going to switch over now to the software and we'll go through each of those steps. All right, so this is the Laserfiche client, and we can see here we are looking at our folder structure. And this is the inbox that I'm going to use. It's called number 1 incoming requests. And a lot of our processes where we're introducing automation or we're trying to centralize the way things come into Laserfiche, we'll have an incoming scans or incoming requests or incoming documents folder where quick fields or workflow can monitor for documents that it needs to process. In this case, I have it named incoming requests. Because I'm scanning check scans, I'm going to store my files once they're processed in a Finance Departmental folder and then under an Accounts Payable subfolder. So I'm going to have my Quick Field sessions send into this folder structure, and I'm going to have it actually automatically create folders based on the vendor that it sees on the barcode cover sheet. All right, so that's the folder structure that we're working with: incoming requests and accounts payable subfolders. So the next thing I need is, if I'm going to extract information off of a barcoded cover sheet or any kind of barcode, I need to usually push that information into the document name, but also into a template. So I'm going to create an accounts payable template. So here's my accounts payable template. I've already named it, and I just have it describing, or a description of what kind of files it's going to be used for. And then I have just four fields. I have vendor name, which is a drop-down list; check number, which is just a text field because you may have letters as part of your check number at some point; check date; and check amount. So that's all I'm tracking. This could be individual to and adjusted to whatever you might have on your barcode cover sheet, but in my case I have these four fields. And I set up the template first so that when I go in to do my Quick Field session, all of these fields and this template will be available to me. So I can just click OK, and then it's in my list of templates. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is go and open up the Quick Fields application. And Quick Fields, the way Quick Fields works is you set up sessions, and a session is basically your definition of what Laserfiche should do with any given file type. And so we're going to walk through the session wizard. It goes through step by step for creating an accounts payable process. So I'm going to click on the full wizard. So click on New Session Wizard, and then I just name my session. And the session name is what's going to show up in your intro screen like we just saw. And so the session name will show, and people will need to select it based on what type of documents that they're processing. So you want your session name to be something descriptive enough so that someone will be able to open the correct session. And then once you get used to creating Quick Field sessions, you may want to do a quick or standard wizard, but we're going to do the full wizard this time because it's recommended for first-time users. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is decide how you're going to bring documents in to Quick Fields. Quick Fields has 4 ways of capturing documents. Universal capture means that it's bringing the images in from a network folder or from a folder on your desktop. Then you have some scanning options if you're scanning using a desktop scanner directly into into Quick Fields. And then the last one is what we're going to use, which is Laserfiche Capture Engine. This means I've already scanned my documents into Laserfiche and they're sitting in a folder waiting to be processed by Quick Fields. This way, I like using this option because a lot of people could be scanning their batches into a single folder, and then Quick Fields can one person can be designated as running that Quick Field session at a given point or throughout the day. All right, so then when we click next, we have a Scan Source Setup button. And this pops up no matter which option you choose, but this allows you to designate the Quick Fields, where Quick Fields should pick up those documents. So you just, like anytime you connect to your Laserfiche repository, you choose your server and repository, and then you have to fill out authentication. You just click apply, and this just allows my Quick Field session to be authenticated into Laserfiche. And then you just walk down the list of each option here on the left. So I tell it where to retrieve files from, and just like anytime you see this button in Laserfiche, the 3 dots, it's going to open up your folder browser and you tell it where the files that you're going to process are going to be waiting. So you click OK. And then you can choose or not choose subfolders. I don't need that for now. You can process document shortcuts, electronic documents. At this point, I'm just going to process documents. I haven't pre-filled any fields, templates, or tags on these files, so I don't have these checked. But if you did want to do any pre-indexing, you could check those as well. You do have some options on document content, depending on if you're using electronic files. I'm not, though. I'm not retrieving fields either. In my case, I am just retrieving images. So I'm just going to have only that checked. I don't have any post-processing options, so I'll just leave that. And if you wanted to limit the retrieval, you could do that here. The reason you might want to limit retrieval is if you're just setting up quick fields for the first time, you might want to just retrieve 10 documents at first, as opposed to all 10,000. Quick fields, when it's capturing images, does actually make a copy of those images and store it on the local machine, just like Laserfiche scanning. So if you have a very large amount of items to capture, then you're going to want to make sure that you are not you're not capturing so many that you fill up your local drive's storage. So that's something to keep in mind for retrieval limits. In my case, I have a pretty small batch for this one, so I'm not going to set a retrieval limit. Once I'm through the setup, I can just click OK. Now my scan source is set up. That means my quick field session knows where to go and retrieve files, which files to retrieve, and if there's any limits on that. Next thing is where I want to store the files. So I need to designate my repository again. This is for after, not before. So I have to sign in with the same credentials though. And then you can validate, make sure that it can connect. And then continue on through your wizard. So the next screen that we see is document class properties. And document class means which type of form are you processing. If you have one of the more advanced quick fields packages, you may have a add-on called document classification. That means that in a single session you could process multiple different, say, barcode cover sheets or multiple different types of documents. In our case, we're just doing a single class, but we'll name it something that's descriptive of what we're doing. And then when you define your class, you have to tell it how you're going to separate out individual documents. So the idea of quick fields, right, is that we can do large batch processing and automate a lot of it. So what's important for quick fields to know is how does it tell when one document ends and the next begins? And you have some options here. The first one is when the first page identification conditions are satisfied. That's the most common type of identification. So basically you say when the first page of the document looks a certain way or contains certain text in a particular place on the page. That's how we know it's starting a new document and the previous one has ended. There's also a last page identification, or if you know that your documents are all a single page or 2 pages, or however many pages, you can set a page limit, so it will just separate out every single page into its own individual document. A lot of our documents, though, are variables, so we like to set first page identification conditions. And we'll go through how to do that when we get through the wizard. All right, so then the next thing is, because quick fields is largely used for form-based document processing, a sample image is often required. So what we're going to do is scan in a sample image. So this is Laserfiche's default sample image, which is that invoice. but we're going to scan our barcode cover sheet, and that's going to replace that sample image with our barcode cover sheet. It's very tiny here, but once we get through the wizard, we'll be able to see it bigger, and we'll show you how to set up the individual barcode reading. For now, it's just getting it in there so it's part of our session. All right, then we click next, and then the next thing is setting up the metadata, right? So one of the greatest things about Quick Fields is that it can prevent a lot of keystrokes if we automate the capture of metadata. So we just have to tell it which template we want to use. We're going to use this accounts payable template, and then we'll choose which volume we want to send to. If you don't know, you can just say leave it as the default. The folder's default. And you can click next. All right, and then the last thing here is we're going to tell it what we want to name the documents. So once a check run is processed, it's going to separate out each individual payment into its own document. And we're going to want to name that something individual and unique. But in this case, we don't want, I'm not quite ready to put this in yet, because to put this in, the name, I'm going to need tokens, and right now I don't have tokens from that cover sheet yet. So I'm going to leave this as untitled for now, and I'll show you how to update this once you've told Quick Fields how to read your barcodes. Same with the folder path, right? When we went and looked at the folder path before, we know we're going to the Finance Department folder, and then we're going to Accounts Payable. But then we also want it to be in subfolders by vendor. And for that, I need a token. But I can get as far as Accounts Payable because I know those folders already exist. So I can click on the button with the ellipsis and then click on Accounts Payable and OK. And then we'll show you how to add that subfolder for vendors when we get into the session. All right, so those are the only options for this screen, so I just click Next. The rest of these options here are just additional specifications that you can use as needed. I'm going to skip those for now because I don't need any of these for my basic session. So I'm just going to click Next. At the end, it gives you a session overview of what you've configured so far. And then you can click you can click Finish to accept and move on. And this will open up the Quick Fields session. All right, so we've told Quick Fields a number of the things that we want it to do so far, but we have a few things left. Up here, we can see, just like in Laserfiche scanning, we have our capture settings. So this is the folder that we're capturing our images from. And we don't have anything other than the folder identified at this point. And then we have our session configuration over here on the left-hand side. Just like in Laserfiche scanning, we can do image processing if we want by clicking on the pre-classification processing. And if we know that we have certain image issues like auto rotate is not usually set up correctly, or we need to remove color, then we can also add those types of things to the pre-classification, which means that all the pages will receive image cleanup before Quick Fields tries to recognize any barcodes. All right, so then we're going to go, we don't need any in this case because ideally, in our ideal world, all of this is completely paperless, and these these check run cover sheets are generated without having to print them out and scan them in, which is the case here. So we're getting really nice, clean images that really haven't even been paper ever. All right, so we're going to just continue on down the list here from top to bottom, kind of like when we go through the admin console. So we have our classification node and our check runs class that we had set up. So if we click on check runs, we're going to see our default information, just like in Laserfiche scanning. There's our default document name and our path and our fields. But before we have our tokens, we need to do some stuff below here and then come back to the top. So we're just going to keep on going down the tree. And the first thing we get to is first page identification. And this is what we were talking about before with making sure that QuickFields knows how to separate out a big bunch of pages into individual documents. So I need to tell it, how does it know that this is the start of a new document? In my case, I have barcodes that are going to tell me individual indexing information, but every single cover sheet is going to have some static text that's exactly the same on only the cover sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recognize this text, and then I'm going to tell QuickFields every time you see the words cover sheet in this spot on the page, then you should start a new document. So I'm going to use these cover sheet words as my first page identification. And the way I do that, the way I select text and read it off of the page, is a process called Omnipage Zone OCR. So I go over to my options on the right-hand side, and I click on Omnipage Zone OCR. And just like Workflow and a number of other programs, when you click on something on the right, it shows up over on your tree on the left. So you can see now under first page identification, we have Omnipage Zone OCR. And we have a little box on our image. So if I click and I drag this box over the words cover sheet, and I want to capture just the words cover sheet, not anything else, and I want to kind of close the gap a little bit because I don't want to capture a lot of other text that is not the words cover sheet, but I know also that sometimes I might have to scan this in from paper, or sometimes these words might shift a little bit on the page. So I'm going to make my box a little bit bigger than the words. And then what I have over here on the right-hand side is another wizard. So I can go through and set up my preferences for what I want QuickFields to do with this text. So this is similar to Workflow, if you have ever worked with Workflow, where you just go through each of the properties and rename it and give it the instructions. So we're just going to name this Zone OCR cover sheet. Cover sheet Zone OCR. Then we're going to go to the next one, and this is going to be the zone. It's just named Zone 1 by default, but if we name it something more descriptive, if we had to use this as a token, it would show up as the word cover sheet in our tokens as opposed to Zone 1, which is a lot more descriptive. And we already set the pixels by dragging the box to where we wanted it and resizing it, so we are all done with that. All right, so the next thing is a condition. And if you've done any work with QuickFields or with Workflow, you know about conditions. Conditions are, what am I looking for as part of this process to know that this is what I'm looking for? So if I click in this box, I have the ability to set an identification condition. This is just, if you click on the drop down here, what you're asking it to do is say, for the token cover sheet, I want this to equal or contain or not equal or start with something. So in this case, I'm going to say I want this token to contain the word cover, words cover sheet. So now I'm just saying if this zone OCR process contains the word cover sheet, that will meet the condition for starting a new document. And then I have a few more steps that I can do. I can select the language. I can select the optimization style. So sometimes if you're trying to recognize text on a page in QuickFields, if it's not recognizing the text correctly, or if you're getting letters back when you're looking for numbers, you can change this to optimize it for speed or accuracy. And depending on if you're having difficulties or not, you might want to change that setting. I'll just leave it at balanced for now. I go back to the bottom. The last one is orientation. This just tells the OCR engine which way your text is facing so that it can read it. So I can not rotate it, and then it will just read it as regular horizontal text. And then you click Finish, and you get an overview screen that shows all of the different options that you've set in case you want to change any of them. All right, and one thing that I really like to do every time I go through one of these wizards is just do a test. At the bottom here, you have Test Processes and Test Current Process. And if you click those, you can just make sure that the box that you've set up is able to read what you're trying to read. And so if I click Test Process, now I get this little message down here at the bottom. And the first cover sheet is my token name. And then the second, everything after the colon is what it was able to read. So I can see that this process is reading the word cover sheet, which is exactly what I want it to read. So that's perfect. So now I know that I've set up QuickFields to read the words cover sheet, and QuickFields knows that when it sees that, it's the beginning of a new document. So now I've gotten it to the point where I can separate out my batches into individual documents. So the next thing to do is to do individual page processing. So this is where I want it to look at the pages and read the barcodes. And this could be other things too, because when I click on page processing, I have access to all of my image processing options, as well as my QuickFields processes. So I have a lot of options here. But because we're doing barcode webinar today, our processes are going to be barcodes. So I'm going to click on barcode. And then again, when I click on barcode over on the right, it shows up under page processing all the way over here on the left. And I also have a wizard and properties that I can set over here back on the right. So I'm going to rename this barcodes since I'm going to be capturing 4 barcodes. So the next thing I'm going to do is just click next through my wizard down here at the bottom. So the first thing I get to is which pages am I looking for barcodes on. Sometimes you'll have barcodes on the second page. Sometimes you'll have barcodes that you're reading only on the first page. In our case, I'm only looking for barcodes on the first page. So what I'm going to do is tell it just page 1. But if I could possibly have barcodes that have this information on other pages, I could select all pages or rename this to page 2. All right, and then the next, we're going to go through the next, which is region selection. And so this, you could just read the whole page and capture all barcodes. But in this case, since I have this pretty standardized and laid out in a specific manner, and I know because this is an internally generated form that I can control where these barcodes are, I know that I can look in specific zones for specific barcodes. So I'm going to add zones. So the first, and then as I add them, I'm going to name them so that my tokens are really easy to use later. So the first thing I'm going to grab is vendor. So I'm going to, I added a zone, then I named it vendor, and then I'm just going to move it over here to where my vendor barcode is. And then I am going to resize this so that it will capture my entire vendor barcode, plus some extra, because this might be a shorter vendor name, so I want to make sure I get a whole vendor name if it's longer. And then again, I gave it a little space above and below and over to this side in case this barcode does shift around on the page if I had to scan papers in. All right. So then before I go on to the next place in the wizard, I'm going to add a token for each, a zone for each token. So I'm going to add one for date. And date is actually a system generated token, so you can't name it just date. I had to rename that to check date. And I'm going to do the same thing, just draw a box around the date and then make sure that it has a little space on each side I'm going to scroll down a little bit on my image here so I can see more of my barcodes. And I want it to be just a little padding, but not so much that I'm capturing completely different places of text on my cover sheet. Okay, so there's check date. That looks pretty good. I'm going to add another one for my amount. So I can drag this over, and again, I'm just adjusting my box so I have a little padding. Oops. And I'm adjusting the box by clicking on these little anchor points that are around the outside, which are these tiny little boxes. And once your cursor turns into an arrow that's pointing both directions, that means you can resize it. So this one's going to be check amount. And then I just have one more left for check number. So I'm going to add one more box, name it check number. And then I'm ready to move on to the next step in recognizing barcodes. Okay, so there's my check number box. So I just drag that down to the barcode for check number. And I'm just going to resize this so I'm not over my check amount barcode as well. Okay, there we go. So then now I have 4 different boxes which are recognizing 4 different barcodes. And they're all listed here, which is going to make my token use in my template fields a lot easier. So next thing is a big decision. This is what's your barcode type? And I know because this is something that is internally generated, I know which barcode type I'm looking at. But if you're trying to barcode scan things that are from an external source, you might not know what your barcode type is. So you could select all of these and just see which barcode gets recognized. So don't worry about it if you don't know what kind of barcode you're looking for. Just select all of them and then do the test process, and it should tell you what type of barcode you're looking at. All right, so the next thing is the barcode direction. You can recognize vertical or horizontal barcodes. In our case, it's horizontal, so I'll just leave that selected. This one is really important. The next one is minimum length. So minimum length is what's the shortest this barcode could possibly be. And if you're trying to recognize something that has maybe 1 or 2 characters, it is super important that you make sure that your minimum barcode says 1 or 2. So the smallest by default is small for 2 characters. But if you have 1 character that you want to recognize, you need to come in and make sure that you set that as the minimum length. In my case, my minimum is 4, so I'm going to leave mine at 4. But that can definitely be one of those things that can prevent your barcodes from reading if you have your minimum length set too high. Next one is checksum. If you do use this to check your data, you can allow that on barcodes as well. And the last one is convert to human readable text, which is what we want the barcodes to do. So we just leave that checked and we click finish. And then we get that, again, that overview of all the properties. And we get the ability to test. So if we click test processes, in our output here, we can see each of our barcodes and the output. So we have our vendor type, our check date, check amount, and check number. And you can see, because I've made sure that our cover sheets also have human readable text below, that it's capturing them accurately. All right, so that is done. So now we've given QuickFields a way to recognize first pages, and we've told it how to read information out of the barcodes. So the last thing we do before we test the session is we go back to the top of our class, and we just go through and finish entering our tokens into our default name and our default storage. So I will go back and clear out the untitled document name, and I click my token dialog. I'm going to open up the full dialog so that you can see this window. I find this to be really helpful when I'm trying to put tokens into a blank in a way that I can see it a little better. So if I click Token Dialog, instead of having to smush all of the tokens into this little blank, I get a little bigger window with a broader view of all the tokens. And so tokens, again, if you're not familiar with tokens, they are a placeholder for information. And that's just how Laserfiche refers to them, but other programs sometimes use the word merge field if that's something that makes a little more sense to you. But basically it's a placeholder for dynamically generated information. So in our case, it's what the quick field session is pulling off of the cover sheet. All right, so back to the tokens, we are looking for the document name. So since this is a check run, I might name it check date, and then a space, and then maybe vendor, and then a space, and maybe check number. That way I have enough information in the name where it should be a unique name, and I should be able to tell if it's the check that I want to open just by looking at the name. So I click OK. And now I can see that those tokens populated with the Laserfiche readable token language, but it was a little easier to see and recognize in the document or in the token dialog. So the next thing is to add that individual vendor token to our document path so that when these files are scanned in and processed, they go to their individual vendor folder. So for the folder path, I'm also going to open the token dialog. And from the folders that I chose before, I'm getting down to accounts payable, but I want to insert another backslash, and then I want to file them under a folder for each vendor. So I'm going to click vendor as a token, and that's going to give me a subfolder for every vendor that I scan. So I'm going to click OK for that. Now you can see I have a little bit more in my path. I have that vendor token. And the last thing is just to do the same thing with the fields. So for each of these fields, I'm going to plug in a token for the type of barcode that I want it to put into that field. So the first one is vendor. So I open up my token dialog again, and I just choose vendor and click OK. And I'm going to do that for each one here. So check number gets the same thing. Token dialog, down to my barcodes, and this is check number right there. Same thing with a date. So token dialog, check date, click OK. And then the last one is check amount. So just go to back to token dialog, and then the barcodes, and then check amount. Okay, so at this point, I've gotten the session enough information to take a batch of files from my inbox, separate them out into individual documents every time it sees the word cover sheet, read all the barcodes, name the document according to barcodes, store the document into the vendor folder that it reads off of a barcode, apply the right template, and fill out all of my template fields. So the last thing is, just like workflow, Laserfiche quick fields will put an asterisk at the top of the window if you haven't saved your changes. And just like workflow, quick fields is saving this as a configuration session. So you want to make sure you save. It's the same as publish in workflow. You go to File, Save. Oops. And then you can just choose where you want to save the file to. And that's going to save a configuration session file. It's called Quick Field Session File. And it's going to save it to whatever location you've chosen. I really recommend that you make a copy of that and store it in a network location. If something happens, because this could be stored locally on your workstation, because QuickFields is licensed by workstation and stored, the installation is per workstation. If something were to happen to that workstation and you hadn't created a backup of those QuickFields sessions, then you'll have to rebuild. So whichever location you chose to store those in, if you make a backup, then you won't have that issue of what if something happens to, say, someone's laptop or someone's workstation. So once you have the backup, then you won't have to worry about it as much. All right, so we've gotten all of the information that we want to have QuickFields need in order to be able to process our batch files. So I'm going to jump back over to the Laserfiche client, and we'll take a look at all of the different, or the batch file that we're going to process here. So here is our incoming requests, and here's our batch that we scanned in. So I'll just kind of take a look at what we had scanned in. So what we have here is just a big batch of files. I might have scanned these in using my desktop scanner, or I might have walked over to our copier and scanned them in there and used Import Agent to get them into Laserfiche. But what I've done generally here is put my cover sheet, right? This is important for it being the first page of the document. And then behind that, I have the rest of the contents of that document. So in this case, it's the check image and the invoice that goes with, or invoices in some cases. So, and then I just have a big batch of the same thing. So it's going check, or cover sheet, check, invoice, cover sheet, check, invoice, cover sheet, check, invoice. And QuickFields' job is to take that all apart and separate it into individual files and name and index them and store them back in the repository. All right, so I'm going to jump back into QuickFields, and in order to start a QuickFields session, it's just like scanning. You just say start scanning, and it will go to that folder, and it will bring in all of the images into Laserfiche QuickFields and separate them out according to the session settings. So I click scanning, it starts scanning. It's a little bit slow on my VM, so I have done this ahead of time. And you can see what I have here is each of my documents have been separated out into their vendor folder. So you can see I had the documents for the Hudson Road Office Park, and then the documents for my Quest vendor, and then my documents for US Bancorp. And so then what I can do once they're all recognized is I can actually page through each one of these, and I can quality control. So I can make sure that what I see on the page is what QuickFields recognized. So this is part of your additional quality control. This part I recommend especially at the beginning to make sure that all of your information is getting read correctly. But you can see my document name is date, and then there's the vendor name. And then in my template, I have the vendor name automatically captured, the check number, check date, and check amount. And I can verify that against what I see on the cover sheet as well. And then they have these buttons that you can go through and kind of quality control. So you can go to each page if you want, or you can just go straight to the next document. And then if you keep going, it will take you through each document in your batch. And then once you're done with your quality control, you can just hit store, and then it will send all of those files into the Laserfiche repository, into the path that you had designated. So that is the process of building out a Laserfiche QuickFields session. So we walked through the getting your infrastructure ready in the Laserfiche client, so setting up the folder structure that you want, setting up the templates that you want, and then setting up the QuickFields session, which is most of the information is started in the QuickFields wizard. So you go through step by step and set up all of the options in the wizard. Once you're through the wizard, then it's just a matter of looking at your sample image and defining the barcodes that you want to pull off of the image, and putting those tokens into the document name, the document filing path, as well as the template information. Once that's done, you are ready to test, and you can bring your documents in and make sure that they are reading correctly and that they're storing correctly. So that's the process. I'm going to jump back over to my presentation here for some final thoughts before we send you on your way and answer questions. All right, so just like all of our consulting webinars, these are the resources that we recommend and used for generating this content and where you can go for additional resources. The Laserfiche Answers website is a wealth of information, lots of Q&A. It's actively monitored by both the Laserfiche user community as well as Laserfiche developers. The Solution Exchange has a lot of great ideas about how people are using barcodes and other quick fields components to build out solutions. So this is coming from actual user community. And then as well, there's our internal CDI customer portal, where we will have the slides and information from this presentation. I hope you can join us for next month's consulting webinar. We're going to do another build along. This one's going to be auto-filling information from workflow or from a form into a Word file. So we're going to build the workflow together that will push data into a Word document. This is one of the most used features of Laserfiche using workflow, but it's something we get a lot of questions about. So we're going to go through it together so everybody has the ability to use that as a resource. That's going to be Thursday, May 9th, same time, 1 to 2 p.m. on Central Time. And if you could please, if you're going to leave before questions, make sure to fill out the survey for a chance to win this awesome t-shirt. And we appreciate your taking the time to give us some feedback on how we can continue to generate interesting content and helpful content, and let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see. All right, so that's it for today, and I'm going to switch over and start answering questions. So if you do have any questions that you've been holding on to, feel free to enter them into the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar interface, and I will switch over and see what questions we have for now. All right, first question is the cover sheet concept similar to that of a fax cover sheet? And it absolutely is. So anything where you want to have an overview of what's contained within so that you can centralize it to a single cover sheet as opposed to having to evaluate each individual file is something that you could use a barcode or text cover sheet for. And then Quick Fields is sold as a per seat license, and then it is also sold in different packages. So you purchase the package with Quick Fields functionality that meets the needs of the types of files that you're trying to scan in. So you may have only the need to capture text and barcodes, but you may have the need to scan in multiple different types of cover sheets or types of documents and scan them into a single file, single Quick Fields session. That requires a slightly different module. We have other content that goes through the Quick Fields packages in a little more detail, but what I would really recommend is talking to your account manager and having a conversation about what might be the best Quick Fields session or Quick Fields package for you, because it's going to depend on what your needs are now and maybe what your needs are down the line. All right, there's another question about OCR Quick Fields might randomly create a new parent file. So I am guessing that this has to do with a token that's generated by using Zone OCR. And if that's the case, then it is possible for OCR to misread the text on a page. Sometimes that can be due to image quality. Sometimes that can be due to the spacing of the zone on the page. And it's possible that Quick Fields might be picking up a leading space before the token or a space after the token. Or it might be changing a lowercase l to a number 1 or something like that, in which case it would create a slightly different file folder in the path if it's getting not exactly a match with the existing path in Laserfiche. So if that's the case, then what you can do is you can try doing some local image enhancements on that zone OCR to make sure that it's getting the best possibility of getting the text recognized correctly. If you find that it's frequently a space before or after the token issue, then you can do some token modification. It's called trim, where you don't allow any spaces before or after your token, and that might take care of that issue. That was definitely something that our support team could help with if you wanted somebody to take a look at it, but I think those would be the most common causes for that. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you everybody so much for your time and for attending our webinar, and we hope to see you next month.